She was a mother, drowning in debt, exhausted and broken after paying for her daughter's heart surgery. Working 3 jobs still wasn't enough to satisfy the wolves she owed. That night, at the lonely train station, 3 thugs cornered her, mocking, shoving, and striking until she fell to the ground. They thought she was helpless. They thought no one would come. But from the shadows stepped a man who had once walked away from justice, a former SWAT sergeant haunted by failure, his scarred German shepherd at his side. In less than 5 minutes the attackers were on the floor, their arrogance shattered. He thought he had buried the hero inside him, but destiny had other plans. Because when evil rises, true courage always answers the call. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more. The afternoon sky hung heavy with low gray clouds, pressing down on the quiet town like an old, tired blanket. A cold wind slithered through the empty streets, carrying the scent of rust and rain from the railway tracks. The sound of distant waves hitting the harbor mingled with the faint creak of metal from the abandoned station, an echo of what used to be life. Ethan sat on a weathered bench outside his small cabin near the edge of town. He was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his frame still disciplined from years of SWAT service. His face was chiseled, marked with the kind of stillness that comes from loss rather than peace. A short beard framed his jaw, streaked with gray, and his eyes, once sharp with confidence, now carried the dull gleam of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. Every movement he made was quiet, deliberate, as if even breathing too loudly might stir the ghosts that lived inside him. Beside him lay Rex, a German shepherd of 7 years, scarred and grizzled, yet still vigilant. His fur was a mixture of black and tan, though the muzzle had begun to fade to silver. A faint scar ran along his flank, a souvenir from the same mission that had broken Ethan. The dog's ears twitched at the faintest sound, but his eyes remained soft when they turned toward his master. Rex was not just a partner. He was the only creature who had stood by Ethan when the world walked away. Ethan's life now was reduced to silence, waking before dawn, fixing broken fences, walking Rex along the forgotten tracks that cut through the forest. He had once been a man who stormed through gunfire to save lives. Now he barely spoke. The guilt from that final mission, the one that took his team and a little girl, gnawed at him like rust eating through steel. Every night the sound of her voice echoed in his dreams. Please help. And every morning he woke before sunrise, trying to believe that saving anyone else might one day balance the weight inside his chest. That day, as the wind picked up, Ethan decided to take Rex to the old station for their usual walk. The building stood like a relic, its paint peeling, its windows clouded with dust and memories. The town no longer used it. The trains that passed were freight only, rattling by like ghosts. As Ethan neared the entrance, a noise broke the stillness. A woman's frightened voice, sharp against the hum of the wind. Inside, under the flickering fluorescent lights, 3 men loomed over a slender woman in a janitor's uniform. Her name tag read Maria. She was in her mid-30s, with chestnut hair tied messily under a faded cap. Her skin was pale from exhaustion, her hands raw from detergent and long hours. She clutched a mop handle like a weapon, her dark eyes wide with fear and humiliation. The men encircled her like jackals. The tallest, Tino, was thick-necked with a buzz cut and tattoos crawling up his forearms, marks of a man who lived by intimidation. His breath reeked of beer as he kicked over Maria's bucket, spilling dirty water across the tiles. "You think you can hide, huh?" he snarled. 3 days past due, sweetheart. Maybe we take your stuff instead." Maria's voice trembled. "Please, I just need more time. My paycheck comes Friday." Her words cut off when Tino grabbed her arm. The sound of the slap that followed cracked through the station like a gunshot. Ethan's body moved before his mind did. Rex growled first, a deep, rolling sound that froze the room. The men turned, startled as the tall figure stepped out from the shadowed platform. Ethan's presence filled the space without a word. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with the cold fire of someone who had long forgotten fear. Tino sneered. "This ain't your business, old man." Ethan didn't answer. His gaze flicked from Tino's stance to the knife handle sticking out of another thug's pocket to the position of Maria, backed into a corner. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "Leave her alone." One of the thugs laughed, stepping forward. "Or what?" Ethan's reply was movement, a blur of precision. His elbow slammed into the man's throat before the question finished leaving his lips. The second swung wildly, but Ethan sidestepped, twisted his wrist, and dropped him with a shoulder throw that ended in a crunch of bone. Tino lunged, knife in hand, but Rex intercepted, snapping his teeth inches from the man's wrist, forcing him to stumble back. Ethan grabbed Tino by the collar, his grip unrelenting. "You come near her again," he said quietly, "and I'll show you what fear really feels like." Tino's bravado faltered. He spat on the ground, backing away with trembling rage. "You've got 3 days, lady," he hissed at Maria. 3 days, or we'll tear that little home of yours apart." Then he turned and stormed out, dragging his bruised men behind him. The station fell silent except for the hiss of leaking steam and Maria's unsteady breathing. She sank to the floor, clutching her wrist. Ethan crouched beside her, his voice softer now. "You okay?" She nodded shakily. I'll be fine. Thank you." Ethan offered her a hand, helping her to her feet. He could feel her trembling through his calloused palm. Rex nudged her leg gently as if to reassure her. For a brief second, Ethan felt something flicker inside, something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. As Tino's car engine roared away outside, Ethan looked through the cracked window, watching the shadows stretch along the rails. The smoke from the departing freight train curled upward like ghosts escaping into the sky. His reflection in the glass looked older, harder, but the light in his eyes was back, faint yet alive. He turned to Rex, who sat at his side, tail still and ears alert. "Come on, boy," he murmured. "Looks like trouble's back in town." Rex gave a low whine, as if he understood. Together they stepped into the gray dusk beyond the station, leaving behind the puddle of dirty water and the echo of a woman's whispered, "Thank you." Somewhere deep within him, the soldier who had buried his heart beneath regret stirred again, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning dawned pale and windless, the kind of morning when fog clung low to the rooftops and turned the town into a watercolor of gray and silence. Ethan walked beside Maria through the narrow streets, Rex trotting quietly at his heel. The woman kept her head low, her mop bucket clattering faintly in her trembling hands. He noticed the hollows under her eyes, the exhaustion that clung to her like another layer of clothing. She was small-framed, not more than 5'3", with narrow shoulders and hands reddened by bleach. Her hair, once chestnut, had dulled into a shade of weary brown. A few strands clung to her damp cheeks. Everything about her spoke of someone who had learned to survive quietly in a world that rarely looked her way. They reached the outskirts of town, where rows of identical decaying buildings lined the street. Maria's home was at the far end, a one-room apartment in a crumbling boarding house that leaned slightly to one side, as if tired of standing. A faded curtain fluttered from the only window, torn and patched with tape. When she unlocked the door, the hinges groaned in protest. The inside smelled faintly of antiseptic and boiled rice. "Sorry," she said, embarrassed. "It's not much." Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to apologize for surviving." In the corner of the room, lying on a worn couch, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her name, Maria said softly, was Sophia. The child had a thin face and dark hair that fell across her forehead in tangled strands. Her skin was the pale transparency of candle wax, and her lips held a faint bluish tint. Yet, when she looked up and saw Rex, her face lit with a smile so wide it seemed to belong to another world. "Doggy," she whispered, her voice light but breathless. Rex approached her slowly, tail wagging in small, careful arcs, as if understanding how fragile this tiny human was. He lowered his head until her small hand brushed his fur. Sophia giggled, the sound weak but pure. Maria's eyes shone with a mix of joy and grief that twisted Ethan's chest. "She loves dogs," Maria murmured, kneeling by her daughter. "We used to have one before I had to sell everything." Her voice faltered. She sat beside Sophia, brushing the girl's hair gently away from her forehead. Ethan stood quietly, scanning the room. On the small table lay a stack of unpaid bills, a bottle of heart medication, and a few coins in a jar labeled Surgery Fund. The sight hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't pity he felt, it was anger. Not at her, but at the kind of world that made people like her beg to keep their children alive. Maria noticed his silence. "I borrowed from them for her operation," she said softly. "The doctor said she needs it soon, but the money's gone. I pay what I can, but they want more. They came last week and smashed my window. Next time—" Her voice trailed off and she looked down, clutching her skirt to hide her shaking hands. Ethan's jaw tightened. "How much?" She hesitated. "4,000. With interest. Maybe double now." He didn't respond. Instead, he crouched beside the girl. "How are you feeling, kiddo?" Sophia smiled shyly. "I get tired fast. Mom says my heart's small, but it's strong." Ethan forced a smile, but inside something twisted deep in him. The words replayed in his mind, echoing another time, another voice. The girl he hadn't saved years ago. Her name had been Lily. He remembered the smell of gunpowder, the sharp cry, the blood pooling too fast for his hands to stop it. That night had never ended for him. It had only gone quiet. Until now. Sophia coughed lightly, the sound brittle and shallow. Maria moved to comfort her, panic flickering across her face. Ethan instinctively reached for the glass of water on the table, handing it to the girl. When she drank, her breathing eased. He noticed how Maria's hands trembled even after the danger passed. Years of fear had trained her body to never relax. "You shouldn't be dealing with this alone," Ethan said quietly. Maria looked up, her brown eyes shining with confusion and guarded pride. "No one else will help me. People here, they mind their own business." "And what about the police?" She let out a small, bitter laugh. "They drink coffee with those men, Mr. Ethan. The law doesn't protect people like me." The way she said it carried no anger, only resignation. That hurt more than rage ever could. Rex moved closer to Sophia, laying his head gently across her lap. She giggled again, stroking his ears. "He's warm," she said dreamily. "He makes the bad dreams go away." Ethan's throat tightened. "He's good at that," he replied. "Saved my life more times than I can count." Maria turned to him, curiosity softening her expression. "You were a soldier." He hesitated. "SWAT. Long time ago." Her gaze lingered on the faint scars on his hands, the disciplined way he stood, like a man who never truly put his armor down. "It must have been hard," she said gently. Ethan's voice grew quieter. "Hard's not the word. Sometimes it just doesn't end." He met her eyes. "But maybe it can." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the whistle of a distant freight train through the cracked window. Sophia's eyelids fluttered, exhaustion claiming her. Maria tucked her in carefully, humming a tune that was more a prayer than a song. Ethan watched them, a mother and child fighting a battle the world didn't care to see. He turned toward the door, his silhouette framed against the dim light. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll stop by tomorrow." Maria frowned slightly. "You've already done enough. I don't want to drag you into this." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "You didn't," he said without looking back. They did. When the door shut behind him, Rex stayed by his side, padding silently through the fog. Ethan's mind was already at war again, not with bullets and flashbangs this time, but with something quieter, heavier. He had walked away from guilt once, but now it had a name and a heartbeat. As he reached the street, he whispered under his breath, "Not again. No more dead kids." Rex let out a soft whine, and Ethan rested a hand on his head. "This time," he said, "we make it right." Night settled over Silver Creek like a bruise spreading across the horizon. The town slept uneasily beneath the hum of flickering streetlights and the distant moan of freight trains winding through rusted tracks. Ethan moved through the industrial district with the silence of a ghost, Rex close by, their shadows stretching and twisting across the cracked pavement. The air smelled of oil, wet concrete, and something else, fear, perhaps, or the residue of forgotten crimes. He crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, binoculars in hand. Through the open door of a nearby warehouse, he saw them. Tino and two others unloading heavy crates under a dying bulb. The yellow light painted their faces in strokes of grime and greed. Tino's laughter echoed, harsh and ugly, as he flipped through a notebook thick with folded bills and handwritten names. The man next to him, a wiry figure with a scar slicing across his jaw, passed him a cigarette. "Boss says this batch is clean," the man said. "Boss can mind his business," Tino replied, kicking a crate shut. "We'll move it when I say we move it." Ethan lifted his camera, the faint click of the shutter almost drowned by the drone of the generators. He snapped photo after photo. Tino counting cash, the ledger, a glimpse of paperwork stamped Silver Creek Freight Authority. The details mattered. The smallest mark might later hang them all. When the last truck pulled away, Ethan approached the warehouse's side door. The lock was old, easy to bypass. Inside he found rows of crates, the air thick with dust. On the central table lay ledgers, loose receipts, and bags of money carelessly tied. He pulled on his gloves, flipped through the notebook, and felt his pulse quicken. Dozens of names, residents from town, alongside dollar amounts scrawled in red ink. At the corner of one page, a note was scribbled. "Paid to HQ. Keep quiet." HQ? His mind turned it over. Could be the gang's base, or something bigger. He snapped more photos, then pocketed a few papers for evidence. Rex gave a soft whine near the doorway, ears twitching. Ethan froze. Voices. Someone else was coming. He shoved the documents into his jacket and slipped into the shadows just as the warehouse door creaked open. Two men entered, uniformed. Police. They weren't patrol officers. Their uniforms were too clean, the badges shining like new money. Ethan could see them from behind a stack of boxes. One man, tall and lean, spoke first. "Boss said this place should be cleared by tomorrow. The less left here, the better." "And the stuff in the books?" the other asked. "Burn it. We're not leaving paper trails." Ethan's gut twisted. The camera hung heavy around his neck as he backed silently toward the exit. The click of his boots on the floor sounded too loud, each step a gamble. Rex followed close, head low, muscles tense. They slipped out into the night just as the faint smell of smoke began to rise from inside. By the time Ethan reached his truck, his hands were trembling, not from fear, but from fury. Someone inside the department was protecting these men. But who? He drove back to his cabin on the edge of town, headlights off. Inside, he transferred the photos to his laptop. The images glowed in the dim light, proof of corruption, proof that the rot wasn't just in the streets, but in the very system that should have defended them. He wrote a report, attached the files, and sent them anonymously to the Silver Creek Police Department. His message was short. Evidence of organized crime linked to warehouse operations. Act fast before it disappears. Then he waited. Morning came gray and wet. Ethan sat by the window with a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands. No calls, no visits. The world outside moved on as if nothing had happened. By afternoon, he couldn't sit still. He walked into town with Rex pretending to be just another man out for errands. The streets buzzed with weekend chatter, the diner full, the newsstand open. But under that ordinary hum, something felt off. A patrol car rolled slowly past him, the officer inside glancing at him a second too long. He made his way to the police station. The building was old brick, its flagpole rusted halfway up. Inside, the air smelled of paper, stale coffee, and disinterest. A young receptionist looked up from her desk. Her name tag read, Officer Riley. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who still believed in rules. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" Ethan nodded. I sent some information about a warehouse. Criminal activity. Just wanted to check if anyone received it." Riley frowned slightly. I haven't heard about that, but I can ask. What kind of information?" "Documents. Photos. You'll know it when you see it," Ethan said, watching her reaction. She typed something into her computer, then glanced back up. "I'm sorry. Nothing like that's been logged. Maybe it got routed somewhere else." Ethan's stomach sank. "Right, somewhere else." She gave a nervous chuckle. "Paperwork gets lost all the time here. I'm sure it's fine." He forced a polite nod, thanked her, and left. Outside, the sunlight hit too hard, the town suddenly brighter than it had any right to be. He leaned against his truck, his thoughts racing. Someone had intercepted the report. Someone with authority. That night, Ethan returned to the outskirts of the industrial district, just to see if the warehouse was still there. It wasn't. Where the building had stood, there was only a pile of blackened timber and ash, still smoking faintly. The smell of gasoline hung in the air. He stood in silence, Rex beside him, the wind tugging at his coat. Whoever was behind this wasn't just protecting Tino. They were cleaning house. And now, whoever had seen that email would know his name, his face, his address. Ethan turned, away, pulling his hood tighter. Somewhere behind him, a car engine started, headlights flashing once before disappearing into the dark. Rex growled low, his eyes following the light. Ethan whispered, "Yeah, boy, I saw it too." He knew now that someone inside the badge had betrayed the badge itself. He didn't yet know who, but he would find out. And when he did, there would be no more warnings. Rain came to Silver Creek like punishment. It hammered on rooftops and hissed against the windows, turning the streets into rivers of oil and shadow. Lightning flashed over the distant ridges, illuminating the town for an instant, ghostly and pale, before swallowing it back into darkness. Ethan sat at his worn kitchen table, gun parts scattered before him, the smell of gun oil and rain seeping into the room. Rex lay nearby, his massive head resting on his paws, amber eyes watching every move with silent loyalty. The dog was aging, gray threaded through his muzzle, the old scars along his flank tugged when he breathed. But his gaze still burned with the same fierce intelligence that had once saved men in war zones half a world away. The clock ticked toward midnight. Ethan had been expecting something, though he didn't know what. Ever since the warehouse fire, he had felt the air change, the way hunters can feel when they've become the hunted. Every sound outside, the snap of a twig, the growl of a passing engine, tensed his muscles. Then came the knock. It wasn't polite. It was frantic. Ethan rose in one swift motion, gun drawn, and opened the door to find Maria drenched, her eyes wide with terror. She was clutching a soaked jacket to her chest, her breathing sharp and uneven. Her hair, usually tied neatly back for work, was plastered to her pale cheeks. "Ethan," she gasped, "they have Sophia. They took her." The words landed like a bullet. He pulled her inside, shutting the door behind her. "Start from the beginning," he said, his voice steady. though his heart was hammering in his chest. Maria tried to speak but broke into sobs. Her shoulders shook as she struggled for air. I was putting her to bed. There was a knock on the window. I thought it was the wind. Then I heard her scream. She pressed her hands to her face. I ran outside and saw them. 3 men. One of them had that scar. You know, the one across his jaw. They shoved her into a van and drove off. Ethan's mind raced. Scarred jaw. The man from the warehouse. They were cleaning up loose ends. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They want me," he said quietly. "They think I still have the evidence." Maria looked up, tears and rain mixing on her face. "Then give it to them. Please, just get her back." Ethan shook his head slowly. "If I give them anything, neither of you make it out alive." She stared at him, speechless. For a moment, the room was filled only with the sound of rain pounding against the roof. Then Ethan turned toward the gun case by the wall. He pulled out his old SWAT issue rifle, cleaned and maintained out of habit, even after years of disuse. He strapped on a holster, slid spare magazines into the belt, and threw on his weathered canvas jacket, its faded fabric still bearing a patch he could never quite bring himself to remove. Rex stood now, ears perked, tail stiff. The air around them had changed, the quiet before the storm of violence. Ethan knelt beside the dog and rested a hand on his neck. "We've done this before, old friend," he murmured, "but not for orders, not for medals. This time, it's for her." Rex gave a soft, guttural sound as if in agreement. Maria watched, trembling. "What are you going to do?" "Find them before they move her." He checked the rifle's safety. "They'll want to trade her for me, or for the files. Either way, they won't wait long." She caught his arm. "You can't go alone." "I'm not." He glanced down at Rex. "I've got backup." He led her outside where the rain came down in silver sheets. The streets shimmered beneath the streetlights, puddles rippling under their boots. Rex lowered his nose to the wet asphalt and sniffed deeply, circling once before heading toward the alley behind the diner. Ethan followed, keeping low. They passed shuttered shops, flickering neon signs, and a stray cat darting across the road. Rex paused at a tire mark half buried in the mud near the old railway line. He sniffed again, then began trotting east, toward the outskirts of town, where the lights thinned and the forest pressed close. Ethan's boots sank into the mud as they moved along the overgrown path. The sound of the rain was relentless, pounding against his hood, drowning the world in static. After nearly 20 minutes, the faint silhouette of an abandoned train repair yard emerged from the mist. Its rusted scaffolds reached toward the sky like broken fingers. The sign that once read Silver Creek Locomotive Works hung by a single chain, clanging in the wind. Ethan crouched behind an overturned cart, raising his binoculars. Through the cracked windows of the main building, he saw faint movement, flashlights sweeping across the walls. A van was parked near the loading bay, its rear doors open. His stomach turned cold. He could see Sophia's small pink backpack tossed carelessly near the entrance. Maria had followed him silently, her hands clasped tight over her mouth. Her clothes were soaked through, her lips trembling. "She's in there," she whispered, barely audible over the storm. Ethan nodded. "You stay here. No matter what happens, don't move until I come back." "I can't just—" He turned to her, eyes hard but kind. "You can, because she needs someone to come home to." He adjusted the rifle strap, exhaled slowly, and signaled Rex with 2 fingers. The dog crouched low, body coiled like a spring. Ethan looked toward the warehouse once more, rain streaming down his face. This wasn't just another rescue, it was redemption wrapped in thunder and fear. Someone had sent a message. "We own justice here." But as he stepped into the storm, Ethan sent his own. Not anymore. Rain poured like liquid steel, slicing through the night with relentless fury. The abandoned train yard stood shrouded in fog, its twisted scaffolds and rusted rails gleaming under flashes of lightning. Ethan crouched near the broken wall, the cold seeping through his soaked jacket. Beside him, Rex was a shadow carved from muscle and resolve, his fur slicked against his body, eyes sharp with anticipation. The storm couldn't drown out the rhythm of danger pulsing through the air. Boots on concrete, muffled voices, the faint metallic click of weapons being checked. Ethan counted 5 guards from his vantage point, all armed, their silhouettes illuminated whenever lightning streaked across the sky. He could smell the gasoline even from here, faint but unmistakable, the tang of something that promised fire. He touched the wound on his arm from earlier skirmishes. It had reopened, warm blood mixing with the rain. But pain had long become background noise to him. He whispered to Rex, "Quiet, steady." The dog responded with a low rumble, understanding every syllable as if it were language. The two moved like phantoms through the puddled yard, weaving between derelict train cars and crates. The first sentry, a burly man with a shaved head and a scar over one eye, barely registered the whisper of movement before Ethan's arm locked around his throat. The man went down soundlessly. Ethan dragged the body into the shadows and pressed forward. Another guard turned at the wrong moment and met the butt of Ethan's rifle squarely to the jaw. A crack, a collapse, and silence once more. Rex took down a third, the only sound the sharp scuffle of paws and a stifled grunt. Then Ethan saw her. Through the wide entrance of the main repair hangar, under the harsh fluorescent lights that flickered from faulty wiring, little Sophia sat bound to a chair near a leaking gasoline drum. Her small face was pale, her lips trembling as she coughed weakly. Her pink rain boots were soaked through. Every drop of water that hit the metal floor echoed like a heartbeat in Ethan's skull. And standing in front of her was Tino. The gangster's slicked-back hair was plastered against his skull, his leather jacket glistening wet. His sneer carried the confidence of a man backed by something larger than himself. "He'll come," Tino said to one of his men. "Men like him can't resist playing hero. He'll walk right into the fire." A deeper voice answered from the far side of the room, calm, heavy, carrying authority like a loaded weapon. "He already has." Ethan froze. From the shadows at the back of the hangar stepped Sheriff Doyle. He was taller than Ethan remembered from the news photos. Broad shoulders filling out the soaked khaki uniform, silver hair plastered to his temples, his badge gleaming faintly in the dim light. Deep lines cut across his face, not from age but from a life spent twisting justice to his will. His eyes were cold, steel gray, the kind that had seen war but brought the battlefield home. Doyle holstered his revolver lazily, smirking. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, Sergeant?" he said, his southern drawl oily and deliberate. "You could have kept your head down, could have lived out your quiet little exile, but you had to go poking at things you don't understand." Ethan stepped into view, rifle raised but steady. "I understand plenty. You've been bleeding this town dry, using the badge as cover. How many people have you buried under your protection, Sheriff?" The smirk slipped from Doyle's lips, replaced by something harder. "You think I care about this place? These people stopped believing in law a long time ago. I'm just giving them what they deserve." Ethan moved closer, every sense on fire. "You call that justice?" Doyle's eyes glinted. "No, son. I call it survival." The gunfire began without warning. A thunderous echo filled the hangar, sparks flying as bullets struck steel beams. Ethan dove behind a half-dismantled engine, returning fire in short, disciplined bursts. Rex lunged from cover, knocking a shooter off balance before retreating to Ethan's side. Tino shouted orders, his men scattering across the catwalks above. One fell as Ethan's shot rang out, tumbling into a pool of gasoline with a splash. A sharp pain tore through Ethan's shoulder. The impact spun him halfway around. He gritted his teeth, slamming against a workbench for cover. The blood was hot against his skin, searing even through the rain. Doyle advanced with measured steps, reloading calmly, a serpent confident of its kill. Sophia cried out, a sound that sliced through the chaos. The leaking drum hissed as fuel pooled beneath her chair, glinting under the light. Ethan's vision blurred, but his focus locked on that small trembling form. Not again. Not this time. He surged forward. His rifle was empty, so he swung it like a club, striking Tino across the jaw. The gangster fell, screaming, clutching his face. Ethan vaulted the overturned table and reached Sophia. He tore the rope from her wrists with shaking hands. "It's okay, kid. You're safe," he murmured. Doyle raised his revolver. "You're too late." But before he could fire, Rex barreled across the wet floor, teeth bared in a blur of muscle and fury. The German Shepherd hit Doyle full force, jaws clamping down on the sheriff's wrist. The gun discharged, a wild shot that struck the leaking drum. The world ignited. Flame blossomed with a roar, swallowing the air in heat and smoke. The shockwave knocked Ethan to the ground. He scooped Sophia into his arms, shielding her as debris rained from the ceiling. "Rex, come!" he shouted, voice ragged. The dog released Doyle, limping toward them through fire and chaos. Ethan pushed forward, his boots slipping on oil-slicked metal, lungs burning. The roof cracked open as an explosion tore through the far wall. He dove through the side door just as the hangar erupted behind them, the fire lighting the night like a second sun. Outside, sirens wailed. Not the shrill cry of a local police, but the deeper, disciplined roar of state and federal units. Floodlights swept across the yard. Armed agents in tactical gear stormed in, shouting orders. Through the haze, Ethan saw a familiar face. Captain Harris, a broad-shouldered black man in his 40s, wearing a rain-soaked trench coat. Once his commanding officer, Harris's sharp eyes softened when they met Ethan's. "You really know how to make an entrance, Carter." Ethan collapsed to one knee, clutching Sophia tight as Rex pressed against his side. Behind them, Doyle and Tino were dragged from the wreckage, coughing, defeated, the fire reflecting in their broken eyes. For the first time in years, Ethan let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, justice could still burn brighter than corruption. The first light of morning crept over Silver Creek like a slow forgiveness. A veil of mist hung above the town, softening the scars it carried from the storm and fire. The air smelled of salt, steel, and renewal. A train whistle echoed in the distance, the same sound that had once marked chaos and pain, but now it felt like a heartbeat returning to life. Ethan stood on the newly rebuilt platform, his hands tucked into the pockets of his weathered jacket. His frame was leaner, his movements slower. The kind of calm that follows years of running. The faint scar on his shoulder tugged when he breathed too deeply, a reminder of both survival and sacrifice. Beside him sat Rex, his once dark muzzle now frosted white with age. The shepherd's ears twitched at the whistle and his tail thumped softly against the wooden planks. He no longer moved with the precision of a soldier, but with the ease of a companion who had earned his peace. The townspeople passed by, greeting Ethan with quiet nods, gestures of gratitude rather than pity. The diner owner, Mrs. Gable, waved from across the street, holding 2 cups of coffee, steam curling up like small ghosts. She had insisted on sending free meals to Maria ever since the trial ended. Maria arrived soon after, her steps lighter than before. Her dark hair, once dull and tangled from exhaustion, shone in the pale sunlight. She wore a modest blue dress and carried a small basket filled with white lilies, Sophia's favorite flowers. Her hands still trembled slightly when she spoke, but her voice had regained a melody that had been long absent. "You came early," she said, smiling softly. Ethan returned the smile, a rare, unguarded one. "Old habits. I don't sleep much when the trains run." Maria knelt and placed the lilies near the new sign bolted to the wall. The wooden plaque gleamed freshly polished, the carved letters catching the morning light. To the guardians of the station, Ethan and Rex, Who kept this heart beating? She traced her fingers over the words, her eyes misting. They wanted to name the square after you, she said quietly, but I told them this was better. You never wanted your name on banners. Ethan chuckled, low and rough. I'm more comfortable in the shadows. A sudden laugh interrupted them, bright, pure, unrestrained. Sophia came running down the platform, her small frame wrapped in a wool coat too big for her. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the chill, and her short brown hair bounced with every step. The surgery scar beneath her collarbone was hidden, but the energy in her movements told its own miracle. She slowed near Rex, dropping to her knees to hug the old dog tightly. Hey, hero, she said, giggling when he licked her cheek. Rex wagged his tail lazily, pressing his head against her shoulder. Maria stood behind her daughter, one hand over her heart. The doctors said she shouldn't be able to run this soon, she whispered. But she keeps proving them wrong. Ethan watched Sophia with a warmth that surprised even himself. She's stronger than any of us, he said. For a while, they all stood in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. The morning train began to roll in, its wheels clattering softly over polished rails. Workers in clean uniforms waved to Ethan as they passed, a small gesture of respect. The town had changed, no longer fearful, no longer ruled by shadows. Sheriff Doyle's trial had been swift and public. His sentence, life without parole. Tino's crew had scattered, some arrested, others simply disappearing into the fog. But Silver Creek remained, scarred yet steadfast. As the sun broke fully through the mist, Ethan knelt beside Rex, his hand resting on the dog's neck. We did it, old boy, he murmured. We saved the heart of this place. Rex's tail beat twice against the platform and his eyes half closed, content. Maria placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. And maybe, she said gently, you saved your own too. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the horizon where the tracks stretched endlessly east, toward somewhere new, somewhere clean. The train whistle sounded again, deep and long, echoing across the valley. Ethan exhaled slowly. Come on, partner, he said to Rex. Time to go home. The dog rose stiffly, following his master as they walked toward the edge of the platform, the rising sun burning away the last traces of night. Behind them, Sophia waved, her laughter carrying over the rails like a promise. And for the first time in years, Ethan smiled without the weight of ghosts. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They whisper through ordinary lives, stitched quietly into moments of grace. The story of Ethan and Rex reminds us that redemption is not granted by chance, but guided by something higher, something divine. When the world seems lost to darkness, perhaps God sends us signs. Not in grand revelations, but in courage, loyalty, and love that refuse to die. Just as a wounded man and an aging dog became instruments of light in a broken town, so too can every act of kindness become a ripple of faith in someone else's storm. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and let us continue to spread stories that honor compassion, courage, and the unseen hand of grace. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones, guide your steps in every trial, and remind you that no matter how dark the night, His light is never far away.